Hello, scholars. Today we're going to talk about quotation marks. Little pieces of punctuation that you've used a lot, but we may need to work out some small details in your usage. For your visual entertainment, we have pictures of rabbits. All right, let's talk first about verbal irony. What verbal irony means is that you are actually meaning the opposite of what you're saying. It's really just another way of sarcasm. So if you were to say Mr. Paisley's grammar lessons are really cool, and you used air quotes, what would happen is that you were actually meaning the opposite of what you were saying. Of course, you would never mean that, I assume, with a sentence like this. Nonetheless, be keenly aware of it. We tend to use air quotes a lot more than we imply verbal irony. So they're a bit overused, a bit misused, and I would like to see you set yourself on the right path. Okay, here's where it gets a little bit confusing. We need to talk about titles. Use quotation marks for the titles of short works. You may want to go ahead and say to yourself, if it's long, it gets a line. In other words, you underline longer works. So songs get put in quotation marks. Songs are contained on albums, which would be underlined. Articles get quotation marks. Articles are contained in magazines and newspapers, and those would be underlined. Scenes from a movie or play that we've given a title to, those would be put in quotes. Obviously, the play or the movie would be underlined. If a chapter is named, we're going to put quotes around the chapter, and we're going to underline the book that it's a part of. Poems get put into quotation marks unless they are epic poems, like the Odyssey or Beowulf. And paintings, just so you know, get underlined. They're considered to be a major work. So this is your little section on titles in general, and keep in mind quotation marks for titles of short works, and if it's long, it gets a line. Okay, now for its primary use, which is actually quoting, quotation marks. That's where the name comes from. Mr. Paisley said, quote, "You will love grammar or you will suffer." Okay. I think we have a later slide dealing with punctuation quotation marks. If not, we'll come back here. Okay, especially around here, we'd like to have nicknames, and you'll see this often in the paper. David Stumpy Jones was a friend of mine. We have, at the making of this video, our sheriff is David Edwards. He has the nickname of Squeak. So often in the newspaper you will see David Squeak Edwards with Squeak in quotation marks. Okay, occasionally you will have a quote within a quote, and that gets to be a little bit complicated, but that is where we have, if you'll just notice right here, single quotation marks. Okay, so the apostrophe button, the computer will do it for you if you use the apostrophe button. If you put an apostrophe before a word and then the apostrophe after, it will flip that first one so that it's a single quote. But that's what you use for a quote within a quote. Okay, here's what I was thinking of before. All right, pay close attention. This will come up on your punctuation test later on, and it's very important to have down. These are American practices. In the UK, they do it otherwise. In the UK, most punctuation is outside of the quotation marks. In the US, however, it's slightly more complicated. Periods and commas are, I really should change that to generally in. There's a couple of cases when they're not. For example, if you had an MLA citation after here, you'd pull the period to the very end. But in most cases, they're inside, and commas are inside as well. However, question marks and exclamation points depend. If they apply to the sentence, they're outside. If they apply to the sentence as a whole. If they apply to the actual quote, then they're inside. Okay, here we go. Let's look at the difference. Mr. Paisley screamed. This is not a question. This is me screaming. The question is here in the quote. Will you ever love grammar? Since the question mark refers to the material inside the quote, the question mark is going to say inside the quotation mark. However, did Mr. Paisley really say, okay, here's the question outside the quotation marks, you will love grammar or else, and then you have a question mark outside. Okay. All right, that's pretty tough stuff. See if you can wrap your head around with it, and we'll be practicing with it some. Now, let's just talk about quotations in general while we're on the topic. Introducing a quote. If you have an introductory word like says, thinks, reiterates, all of these ones up here, you're going to use a comma with that introductory word. So Mr. Paisley says, comma, and then the quote. Okay. If you don't have introductory words, you can use a colon. The novel begins strangely, colon, and then you have the quote that you're wanting to pull there. Okay, take a look at those examples. That's getting pretty intense. That finishes our discussion of quotations and quotation marks. We'll be practicing in class, but it's very important you get this down as you will be using many quotes and quotations in your writing.